1984, I was diagnosed with osteogenic sarcoma in my right leg, just above my knee. I was lucky in the fact that I was 10 years old and didn't really know the severity. I knew it was serious, but it's funny, in that 10-year-old brain, you don't know how serious. Like, I never thought I was possibly going to die from it. You know, something was going to happen where I was going to be okay. Eventually, I got hooked up with John many years down the road when I moved to Syracuse. I moved to Syracuse for a master's program in teaching. Eventually got a teaching job out here and met my wife, et cetera, et cetera. But how I found John Tayo is a funny story in itself. I was literally looking through the yellow pages. At the time, we used to have the book. And I found John as a Syracuse, prosthetist. And I'm like, this is the guy I want to go to. Because I was active, I was athletic, and I just felt like I wasn't getting to that next level. And I remember very clearly asking them, is there anything else we can do?
This is in Utica.
In Utica, and to advance the technology or to advance my capabilities. And I got the answer of, no, not really. It was awesome because John did an actual interview with me. He kind of told me what he was about and what he can do and this and that. And, after a half-hour conversation, I knew that's where I wanted to go. I remember thinking in the back of my mind, is this for real?
Right.
It's almost like you can't believe, that place is that great, but it truly is. And, he always put me in a situation that would maximize my potential.
Before you got where you felt you wanted to be.
Because without the helix hip joint, I wouldn't be able to do the things I can do. I mean, the hip joint is so critical in your gait, in your movement, your stability. So helix hip is a hydraulic hip joint. It's very high functioning, much more complex than the old traditional spring hinge hip joint. I can go from walking to running like that because I can control that a little bit better. So that was a big thing, and then the C leg. So eventually John got me in the helix hip and the C leg, and after I got used to that and understood some of the things it could do, then I was able to run a little bit and jump and play basketball differently, and just everything improved, by a factor of 10 or 100. I'm not sure, but it was a dramatic increase in potential. So Jeff made my last prosthesis, and he's fantastic also. Literally, I went into the office that day, and I got into this prosthesis, and it was almost perfect. And these things are very, very technically sensitive. Any rotation, anything is a little off, the person wearing it will pick up on it immediately. And even though it's a little tweak or a little something off, it feels like a big deal. And I'm telling you, Jeff had that thing so close, it was just like minuscule adjustments for me to walk out the door. I couldn't believe it. I mean, they're renowned for their fitting. I mean, that's what separates John and Syracuse Prosthetics and Orthotics from everybody else, is their ability to fit people in a socket or a brace. And there's a gift that they have. They're not amputees themselves, but they understand it. And I'm sure it started with John's dad, and then John picked up on it and then passed it down to Jeff. But they do have this amazing understanding of how things work and feel without being an amputee themselves. So my mission from then forth was to show people what is possible with a helix hip, being a hip dysartic patient. So I did a bunch of different skill videos at the YMCA, and they just had the stair steppers.
Right, that's what it is.
Yeah, so I set up a few sets of stair steppers, and I did a few different videos. But yeah, I wanted to demonstrate how confident I was in the C leg, demonstrate my abilities and what is possible. So I did a few things. I ran, and then I leaped over the stepper, and I wanted to demonstrate that knee is so stable that you can land on it and it won't collapse.
That's just amazing to me.
Yeah, and then I did another one, I believe. I think I jumped over two. Due to the help John gave me with the prosthetics and Autobach, and you know, I've come far enough where I like to do a lot of projects around the house. So, but I also built a deck, a patio, and I just finished 2 posts in front of the house for the porch that I'm really happy with. My wife was, this house is about 15 years old, and she was never happy with the 2 front posts. They were like really small posts. They didn't fit the house. So I finally did that, and she's happy with them, so I'm happy. Oh, I did my garage too. I love my garage now.
Okay, great.
I epoxied the floor and painted the walls and decorated a little bit. So those are the things that I'm able to do now that I have, you know, a good stable prosthetic leg. I'm Rick.
I'm Melanie.
We
are SPOC.
So in 1984, I was diagnosed with osteogenic sarcoma in my right leg, just above my knee. And during that, when I found out, this is kind of a story in itself. My mother was a nurse, and it was funny. Right before I went to an orthopedic specialist, she said, you know, kind of off the cuff, it could be cancer. And you're a 10-year-old kid, you're like, what is cancer?
Wow.
And she kind of explained it to me. And we had an appointment with an orthopedic specialist because our local physician's assistant's office, you know, my mother concluded they were on the wrong track. They were not diagnosing what this was.
Right.
They never did an x-ray or anything. So
Right.
she knew the next step. She had to bring me to an
You're
orthopedic. Very lucky. My mother, I swear by this, my mother saved my life.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we went to the orthopedic specialist in Utica, and he did an x-ray, and within a very short amount of time, he knew exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. He took my mother out of the room, and I heard her crying in the hallway, and I knew immediately what it was.
Right.
And I knew it was bad.
Yeah.
But I was lucky in the fact that I was 10 years old and didn't really know
Yeah.
the severity. I knew it was serious, but it's funny, in that 10-year-old brain, you don't know how serious. Like, I never thought I was possibly going to die from it.
Right.
You know, something was going to happen where I was going to be okay. But long story short, I went to Boston, Mass General. Luckily, again, another
Yeah.
critical maneuver in my opinion.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Uh,
the best place.
Yep, Dr. Gebhardt at the time was one of the top orthopedic surgeons in the country. John Tayo actually knew him. And I was very lucky to get hooked up with him. He did the surgery, hip disc artic surgery.
So,
Yeah, there were 2 options, and thank God my mother was there again. The first option was to leave some residual limb, and the second option was to do the full removal of the femur bone. In other words, a hip disc artic surgery.
they take the whole femur out.
Yep. And at that time, my mother was most concerned with my survival, right? You know, rightfully so.
Sure.
So, you know, they went ahead and did that. And, you know, I was there for about a month. And then some of the oncologists there knew Dr. Dubansky in Syracuse upstate. So they felt comfortable sending me to upstate and work with him. So I went through upstate to receive chemotherapy treatments for about 9 months.
Oh, right, because you got cancer and it could be elsewhere, right? Okay.
Right. So, I mean,
That must have been horrible.
the chemo was far worse than the
Yeah.
surgery, far worse.
Yeah.
Chemo is, you know, not fun. But, yeah, I mean, from there, I didn't have any radiation. It was just chemo. So during, you know, the first 20 years of my experience with prosthetics, it was a spring hinge knee and a spring hinge hip. I can't tell you how many times I would fall. You just get something under your foot, the knee collapses, I'm down. And it just happens so quick. I'm very athletic, but I can't even catch myself because it's so fast. It just goes down.
Yeah.
And it used to be almost a daily occurrence. I would just walk through the grass and hit something, and
Yep. I understand.
it was kind of funny. I can joke around about it now, but my wife would, you know, we'd just be walking, and
Yeah.
I'd almost fall, and she's like, what happened? What are you doing?
Yeah, right.
You know, and it's just,
Just-
you know,
it
something
happens.
got under my foot. And growing up, I went to Empire Orthopedics out of Utica. A very good prosthetist by the name of Dave Forbes. He lost both of his legs, I believe, in Vietnam. So he had an understanding of what goes into it. And he was pretty good.
Yeah.
And eventually I got hooked up with John many years down the road when I moved to Syracuse. I moved to Syracuse for a master's program in teaching. Eventually got a teaching job out here and met my wife, et cetera, et cetera. But well, I would tell them it's not going to be easy. You know, it's a big life adjustment. And you know, I thought about this a lot, and I've said this before to some other people, like being where I am now 35 years later, I want to will people to go from here to here overnight.
Yeah, right.
And it can't happen. I mean, losing a leg to whatever situation, the recovery is a process. And you know, sometimes I think it's sometimes a little counterproductive if you're at the beginning stage and you just want to leap to the end stage. I mean, this is a great goal, but you have to understand it's a process. And it can be frustrating if you want to go from here to here in 2 weeks.
Yeah, right, sure, right. Yeah.
So people watch videos like mine and maybe they want to make that leap in a few weeks or a month, and it, you know, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'll never say anything's impossible. But, you know, it's a process to recovery mentally and physically. You know, when you first come home with an amputation, it's mentally you're just trying to figure it out, you know. And for me, it took many years. It took me many years to process, you know, being an amputee, accepting being an amputee. Truthfully, I think it's a little easier now because the technology is far superior. Yeah, I think it's a different time, and I'm glad. You know, it's definitely more visible. It's more understood, I suppose. When you walk around with a prosthetic leg, people aren't like, whoa. I walk around in shorts all the time. People see my leg, and I only get positive feedback. I don't get like weird stares or, you know, and I love it when people come up and ask me questions because that tells me they want to be educated.
Sure.
And, you know, I encourage them to ask the questions. I think sometimes they're like, oh, I'm sorry to ask. I don't know if that makes you uncomfortable. For me personally, I love it, because the more people we can teach about it, the more it's going to help out the amputee community, I think, and help them too, you know, help them understand it and, you know, successes or challenges that come with it.